On December 15, 1994, in Catasauqua, Pennsylvania, a man named Andrew Katranak rushed home from work to be with his family. When he got there, his wife Joanne and their 3-month-old baby were missing. The next morning, her husband found his wife's abandoned car just 300 feet from their house. Andrew Katranak took police down to his basement and showed them that his cellar door had been pried open and that the telephone wire leading to an answering machine had been cut.
A mystery is unfolding in Catasauqua. A young mother and her baby boy appear to have vanished.
There's an empty crib in the Katranak house on Front Street. He says the two have been missing since yesterday afternoon.
We're at a loss. The police are at a loss. We don't know. Just, what do you do? And where do you look?
Soon after their disappearance, pictures of Joanne and her baby were placed all over town in hopes that someone might have seen them.
At this point, we didn't just have a woman and a baby who were missing. We also had very suspicious circumstances surrounding their disappearance.
Even though neighbors told police that the Katranaks appeared to have a good relationship, authorities still remained suspicious about her husband.
The main focus of the investigation at this point, of course, was Andrew Katranak. He was Joanne's husband, he was Alex's father, and we felt that if there was any information about their whereabouts, he would have that.
But without a body, detectives did not have the evidence to arrest him or anyone else. Winter slowly passed, and the ground began to thaw. And on a farm more than 50 miles away from the Katranak home, a man came across what looked like a pile of clothes lying in some secluded woods.
My neighbor is a police officer, and he came to my door, and when I opened the door, I knew. I said, "You found them."
4 months after her disappearance, Joanne and her baby had finally been found.
She had been outdoors between December and April, but her body was fairly well preserved because of the cold temperatures. The body of Alex was left upon the abdomen of his mother. It almost appeared as though the offender was attempting to place the infant back into the womb of the mother.
Even through a severe winter, the crime scene had remained intact. The baby's bottle and his favorite toy telephone were still there. But more importantly, after hours of sifting through the soil, a detective found 2 human hairs located underneath the baby's diaper bag. It was their first breakthrough because the hairs did not belong to anyone in the Katranak family. At the autopsy, the forensic pathologist determined that someone had shot Joanne Katranak just below her right eye and had viciously struck her in the head 19 times with a blunt instrument. But he could not determine if the baby had been smothered or had been left to die during the winter.
This was, as we term it, overkill. This was a person who had a rage for the victim, who could have had a real personal problem or a hatred for the victim.
Two days later, Andrew and the rest of his wife's family attended the funeral of Joanne and her baby. Although he was visibly upset, Andrew Katranak was being watched very carefully by the police. With Joanne's car now at their forensic unit, the evidence team began a long, detailed examination of her vehicle. They vacuumed the interior and collected every particle of debris in the car. Once again, they found unidentified strands of human hair.
They found 6 hairs that did not match the mother, the father, or the baby. But they did match the 2 hairs that had previously been collected at the crime scene. Some of the hairs had been pulled out by the roots, indicating they'd been pulled out during a struggle. They also had dried blood on them, which meant that they had probably come from whoever had killed Joanne Katranak and her baby.
The hairs were over 8 inches long and dirty blonde. But under a microscope, forensic scientists discovered that the section of hair closest to the root was brown, indicating that the hair had been dyed.
The fact that the hairs were over 8 inches long and were dyed suddenly suggested that the person who committed these horrible murders was not a man, but was a woman.
Several of Andy's old girlfriends were investigated, including a woman named Patricia Rohrer.
Andrew Katranak told me 3 days prior to Joanne and Alex's disappearance, Pat Rohrer had called the Katranak residence because she wanted to speak to Andy. Joanne Katranak had answered the telephone, and she angrily told Pat Rohrer, "Don't call here again. Andy's happily married and he has a baby now," and slammed the phone down on Pat Rohrer. So once we found the bodies of Joanne and Alex Katranak, we decided to look further into that phone call and further into Patricia Rohrer.
Detectives learned that Pat Rohrer had lived with Andy for 5 years, but they had broken up long before he had met his wife. And although Rohrer now lived over 500 miles away in North Carolina, it seemed that she had not forgotten about her old boyfriend.
We had testimony from both of her succeeding boyfriends that occasionally, when she would become intoxicated or despondent, that she had personal effects from her relationship with Andrew Katranak, photographs of them together that she would get out and she would go over and look at. So she had a thing for Andrew Katranak that she wouldn't let go.
Detectives now drove to North Carolina to collect blood and hair samples from Patricia Rohrer. But they were troubled by one obvious fact, that Patricia Rohrer had black, not blonde hair.
On the way to the hospital, she made a big deal of her hair color by saying to one of the police officers, after looking at the warrant, she said, "Dirty blonde? Who has dirty blonde hair? I don't have dirty blonde hair."
But fortunately for the police, Patricia Rohrer was very good on horseback. So good, in fact, that just 1 week before the murder, she won first prize in a rodeo competition. And of course, she had her picture taken. And it clearly showed that Pat Rohrer had dyed her brown hair blonde.
Even though she wore a cowboy hat, we were able to get the length and the color of her hair, which matched perfectly with the hair, the 6 that were found in the car, in length and in color. They were all about 8 inches in length, and they were all dirty blonde. Also matched the 2 hairs that were found where the bodies were found. So we had 8 hairs that matched the hair depicted in the picture taken a week before the crime was committed.
On February 6, 1998, Pat Rohrer went on trial in Allentown, Pennsylvania, for murder. Although she insisted that she was innocent, DNA comparison tests showed that her hair and the hairs found at the crime scene were identical. The jury found her guilty, and she was sentenced to life in prison.
Doesn't matter what penalty she got, she won. She took my life. And my life was perfect. December 15th, 1994, and it'll never be that again.
Authorities said there was no rational explanation why a phone call so enraged Patricia Rohrer that she drove 500 miles to murder a woman she never met, leaving her 3-month-old baby to die.